A reading from the Gospel according to John.
Glory to you.
Since the Passover of the Jews was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He found in the temple area those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as the money changers seated there. He made a whip out of cords and drove them all out of the temple area with the sheep and oxen, and spilled the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who sold doves, he said, "Take these out of here and stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples recalled the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house will consume me." At this, the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up." The Jews said, "This temple's been under construction for 46 years, and you'll rise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Therefore, when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they came to believe the Scripture and the words Jesus had spoken. These are the words of our brother Jesus. Praise to you, Jesus Christ. Have a seat. Can we just take a moment to talk about pickleball? I mean, what is it with pickleball? How did that get to be a thing among people our age? I don't get it. 19.8 million Americans are dedicated pickleheads.
Oh my gosh.
They're hooked on hitting a wiffle ball with a paddle, trying to beat their opponents. Brene Brown is a serious picklehead. And in an interview with Father James Martin, she talked about her competitive nature and her attempts to beat her friends at the game. Apparently, Brene played tennis in college, so she thought this will be a cinch. But just as she offered her first serve in a game with friends, she experienced a sharp pain and fell to the ground. Pickleball took her down. Months later, Brene was still feeling the injury, so she went to see a sports trainer who gave her a fitness test, and she scored as if she were in her late 70s. I believe she's younger than I am, with no core strength at all to speak of. And so, as much as Brene wanted to get back out there and continue pickleball, her trainer explained that other parts of her body were compensating for a weak core, setting her up for further injuries. He told her, "We are not going to build on dysfunction." So he created a plan that built a foundation of strength before working with Brene on skills directly related to pickleball. This made Brene think about the companies that she'd been coaching and how many were sustaining organizations with compensatory injuries rather than starting from the beginning and building a strong core. She continued, "It's like the injuries that the church can take on sometimes because they're not paying attention to the core." And that had me wondering, on this day when we are called to revere one of the oldest temples of our faith practices, St. John Lateran, if, as Jesus cleared the temple, he was saying to us, we are not going to build on dysfunction. In an opinion piece in America Magazine titled J.D. Vance's Immigration Comments Are an Insult to Our Catholic Faith, writer Samia Fisher says, "The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that prosperous nations are obliged, to the extent that they are able, to welcome the foreigner in search of security and a means of a livelihood which he cannot find in his country of origin. And the Holy Scripture over and over again commands us to welcome the stranger, rescue the refugee, feed the hungry, and house the homeless. Not recklessly or thoughtlessly, says Simcha Fisher, and not in a way that endangers your family, but yes, in a way that might make you feel uncomfortable. Yes, in a way that stretches you a little bit. Yes, in a way that makes you open the door, a door that you would rather leave shut. This is our command for our country and for our individual families. This is our faith. When you do something for your brother, you are doing it for Jesus. Ezekiel's vision in our first reading invites us to imagine the sort of spiritual community that flows forth with life-giving water, rather than the stench of things like clericalism and exclusion, like white privilege and Christian nationalism. We are building on dysfunction. But if we, like Jesus, could cleanse the church, could start over with a clean slate, what would we do? If we, like St. Francis, heard the words, rebuild my church, how would we rebuild? What would be the water that would flow from our temple, providing nourishment in a healthy environment for life to flourish? What would be our core strength, that part of us that everything else is built upon? As Richard Rohr says, we do not find our own center, it finds us. We do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. In other words, our journeys around and through our realities lead us to the core reality, where we meet both our truest self and our truest God. And that truest self and truest God is unshakably good. Father Greg Boyle suggests that any hope of changing our current culture of hatred and division must start by recognizing the unshakable goodness in every person, even those most difficult for us to love. Father Boyle says that so often, just as we're tempted to do towards our brother in faith, J.D. Vance, when we are fighting injustice, we state that we are for one thing and against another. We are for democracy and against fascism. We are for inclusion and against segregation. We are for equality against racism, genderism, and all the other isms. In doing so, we other those who identify as representatives of what we stand against. We say, I belong to those who love, and I'm opposed to those who hate. But othering, says Boyle, whether we are the ones being othered or the ones doing the othering, is the opposite of who God is. It says that there are some folks who don't belong to us, or they belong only if they change their behavior. Tenderness of heart is what Father Boyle suggests we start with in our efforts to rebuild. If we're going to bring life-sustaining hope to the world. And tenderness of heart requires that we remain open to holding the pain of the world, that we are curious about others without judging them. We lean in with kind attention, with a patient and humble leaning that swats away certainty. You know certainty, that certainty that says we stand on the right side of any issue. We seek instead to understand. This weekend, as you know, I traveled to Lawrence, Kansas for an ordination. and I was admittedly nervous. I had heard about delays at the airport, about air traffic controllers who were calling in sick and long lines and security, tired, unpaid federal workers who were out to get anyone brown or anyone with an accent. But it wasn't the case at all. Whether I was in St. Louis or Kansas City or Lawrence, people were kind and helpful. This trip was easy. Those I sat with were gracious. Stripped of all of our divisions and preconceived ideas of one another, it made me wonder if the solution to this truly ugly time in American history is to be found not in our politicians, not in our policies or our protests, but in the goodness of our ordinary, everyday people. The good and decent folks who simply want to go about their lives and care for their neighbors and existing communities. Perhaps the way to rebuild the church on something other than dysfunction, the way to flow like a river from the temple of God into the fields and byways of this world, is in returning to our states of goodness. Writer Whitney Coe reflects, the culture of the moment demands our allegiance to political parties, ideologies, and hashtag movements to save our lives. We're in full survival mode. We are encouraged to be tough leaders, innovators, producers, to build power, to organize, to be woke, to be the fire or to put out the fire. Our world is heavy with tragedy and injustices that sear and break our hearts. And the work of overcoming evil sometimes overshadows the true call to be love in the world. In the face of suffering, we too often surrender Christ's light to reactionary grief, anger, and Twitter, and we forget to ask, what would love have me do in this moment? Irina Gut-Opdyke was a Polish Catholic nurse who risked her own life to hide Jews persecuted by Nazi Germans during World War II. She was 19 years old and employed as a housekeeper for a high-ranking Nazi officer. When she heard that the nearby Jewish ghetto was about to be liquidated, she hid her Jewish friends in the safest place she could find, in the basement of her employer's home. Irina believed that God would open a path and she would walk in it, that God would take care of her, and her job was to do what she was expected to do, to follow God into love. And so over the next 2 years, she used her creativity and quick thinking to keep her friends safe until she was able to help them escape. After suffering from the sexual assault of this Nazi officer, Irina went to a local priest to confess her sins and was told by the priest that she had no place in the Catholic Church. And so she kept the story of her bravery to herself, having no intention of ever sharing her story. But when Irina came to the United States, she crossed paths with a Holocaust denier. And she opened up about her experience. Through her goodness and her willingness to be tender-hearted with this denier, the world was changed a bit. In our second reading, Paul says, brothers and sisters, you are God's building. The feast of the dedication of the Basilica of St. John Lateran isn't just a celebration of an old building built on the land of a pagan family and used for functions in the early days of the Roman Church. It is a reminder that we are the church. Do you not know that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? And the temple of God, which you are, is holy. Ilia Delio says it this way: the world is not something we participate in, it is something that we are. In and through love, God is actualized because the divine energies of love are embodied in you and in me. And it is the embodiment of divine love that unifies the world in its formation. It matters, therefore, how we love, what we do in the name of love, and how love empowers us to create the world. Therefore, let us walk humbly with God, embodying the love that God has for this world.